The moment my husband's hands left my shoulders and I felt my body tip backward into open water, the last thing I heard was his voice, calm and almost gentle. "I'm sorry. I really am." The shock wasn't just the icy slap of the ocean against my skin or the way my breath vanished from my lungs. It was the realization, in that split second before I disappeared beneath the surface, that the man I had loved for 12 years had just tried to kill me for $2.5 billion. So I need to ask you this right now, before I explain anything else, before you judge me for what I eventually did. If your spouse tried to murder you for money, and you survived, how far would you go to make sure they never got away with it? I remember the water closing over my head, the sound of the boat's engine roaring away, and the taste of salt flooding my mouth as I thrashed, panicked, my mind screaming that this couldn't be happening. This wasn't some movie or nightmare. This was my life. This was my husband. And as I sank, I honestly believed that this was where it ended, that my story would finish in the dark, cold silence under that endless blue. But to understand how I ended up there, you need to know how everything began, because the betrayal didn't start on that boat. It started years earlier, disguised as love, ambition, and trust. When I met Daniel, he was charming in a way that felt effortless. He wasn't the loudest man in the room, but when he spoke, people listened. He had this steady confidence, this sense that he always knew what he was doing, and at 26, fresh out of grad school and desperate to prove myself in the world, I found that intoxicating. We met at a charity gala, one of those events where everyone pretends they're there for a good cause, but really just wants to network. I was there representing a small investment firm I'd just joined. He was there as the guest of one of the keynote speakers, already a rising star in the finance world. We talked for hours that night. About work, about our families, about the future. He told me he admired my intelligence, that he liked how I challenged him. I told him I'd never met anyone who seemed so grounded and driven at the same time. Looking back now, I can see how carefully he curated that image, but back then, it felt real. It felt safe. We started dating almost immediately, and within a year, we were married. Our marriage, at least on the surface, was everything people envy. We lived in a beautiful house overlooking the water. We traveled constantly. We hosted dinner parties where everyone laughed and drank too much wine and told us how perfect we were together. Daniel was climbing the corporate ladder at a terrifying speed, and I was doing well in my own right, managing portfolios and building a reputation as someone who could see opportunities others missed. We were a power couple, or at least that's what everyone said. The truth is, though, there were cracks even then. Daniel hated not being in control. He never yelled, never threw things. But there was a coldness that would creep into his voice whenever something didn't go his way. He had a way of making me feel like I was being irrational or overly emotional whenever I questioned him. If I raised concerns about one of his risky investments, he'd smile and say, "You worry too much. Trust me." And because I loved him, because I wanted to believe in us, I did. The money started growing faster than either of us expected. Between my investments and his deals, we went from comfortable to wealthy to obscenely rich in just a few years. Then came the opportunity that changed everything. It was a private venture, the kind that only a handful of people ever get invited into. A revolutionary technology, early stage, with the potential to disrupt multiple industries at once. The buy-in was massive, but so was the projected return. We're talking billions. Daniel was obsessed from the moment he heard about it. He talked about it constantly, pacing the house late at night, running numbers, making calls. I was skeptical at first. Not because I didn't see the potential, but because something about it felt off. The secrecy, the way Daniel refused to share details, even with me. When I pressed him, he told me it was because of NDAs, because this was next-level stuff, and I didn't need to worry. That should have been my first real warning. But instead of pushing harder, I let it go. The thing is, a huge portion of the capital for that investment came from me. From my accounts, my assets, my reputation. We structured it together. Or at least that's what I thought. In reality, Daniel was quietly maneuvering things so that control would ultimately rest in his hands. I didn't see it at the time. I trusted my husband. I trusted that we were a team. As the years went by, the value of that investment exploded. $2.5 billion. That was the estimated worth of our stake when everything finally came to a head. $2.5 billion that turned my husband into someone I barely recognized. He became distant, secretive. He started taking trips without me, claiming they were business-related. He guarded his phone like it held state secrets. When I asked questions, he'd sigh and say I was being paranoid. The night before the boat trip, we had our first real fight in years. I had discovered documents I wasn't supposed to see, hidden deep in a shared drive. They suggested that Daniel had been making plans to move assets offshore, plans that didn't include my name. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He didn't even pretend. He just looked at me with this expression I'd never seen before, something cold and calculating, and said, "You wouldn't understand." That was when I realized how little I truly knew the man I'd married. Still, even then, I didn't think he was capable of what he eventually did. When he suggested a weekend getaway on his friend's yacht, I thought maybe it was his way of making things right. I thought we needed time alone, away from lawyers and spreadsheets and tension. I wanted to believe that we could fix this. The day of the trip was beautiful. Clear skies, calm water. I remember standing on the deck, the sun warming my face, trying to convince myself that everything was going to be okay. Daniel was unusually quiet, but I chalked it up to stress. We drank champagne, talked about trivial things. For a few hours, it almost felt normal again. Until it didn't. We were alone on the deck when he suggested I lean over the railing to look at something in the water. I turned my back for just a second. That's all it took. His hands on my shoulders, the sudden force, the sickening lurch as the world tilted. And then I was falling. What saved me wasn't strength or luck. It was preparation I didn't even know I had. Years of swimming, of refusing to let fear control me. I fought my way to the surface, gasping, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. The boat was already moving away. I screamed his name until my throat burned, but he didn't look back. I don't know how long I floated there, clinging to a piece of debris, my mind racing through disbelief, terror, and a growing, icy rage. At some point, another boat spotted me. A couple on a fishing trip pulled me aboard, shocked and confused by the state I was in. I told them I'd fallen overboard. I wasn't ready to say the truth out loud yet. Saying it would make it real. At the hospital, wrapped in blankets, shaking uncontrollably, the reality finally sank in. My husband had tried to kill me, not in a moment of passion or anger, but calmly, deliberately. For money, for control. And as the shock wore off, something else took its place. Determination. Because I was still alive, and I wasn't about to let him erase me. So that's where I was, lying in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our marriage in my head, wondering how I could have been so blind. And this is where I want to pause for a second and talk directly to you. Imagine finding out that the person you trusted more than anyone else saw you as an obstacle, something to be removed. Imagine knowing that they're out there right now, thinking they've gotten away with it. If you were me, would you go straight to the police and hope the system worked? Or would you start planning something else entirely? Because that was the choice in front of me. And before I tell you what I decided to do, before I reveal how I went from victim to someone waiting calmly for my husband to come home, I want you to really think about it. Comment below what you would have done in my place. Because what came next changed everything. And not just for Daniel, but for me too. When I was discharged from the hospital, officially listed as a woman who had fallen overboard in a boating accident, I walked out with a smile on my face and a storm in my chest. The doctors thought I was lucky. The nurses kept telling me how blessed I was. None of them knew that luck had nothing to do with it, and blessing was the last word I'd use. I went home alone, to the house Daniel and I had shared for years. The same house he believed I would never step into again. As I unlocked the door, my hands were steady, but inside, everything was shaking. This was the house he thought would soon be his alone, filled with my absence, my silence, my erased existence. And that thought hardened something in me permanently. I didn't call the police. Not yet. People love to think they know what they'd do in situations like this, that they'd march straight into a station and demand justice. But the truth is, when money like $2.5 billion is involved, justice becomes slow, complicated, and easily buried. Daniel had resources, lawyers, connections. He'd planned this. If I accused him immediately, it would turn into my word against his, and he would paint me as unstable, hysterical, a woman who fell and now wanted revenge. I needed leverage. I needed proof. And most of all, I needed time. The first thing I did was pretend I was dead. Officially, I was listed as missing for several days. Daniel had reported me as lost at sea, his voice apparently shaking with grief when he spoke to authorities. I watched recordings of his interviews later, the way he dabbed at his eyes, the way his voice cracked at just the right moments. He deserved an award for that performance alone. During that time, I stayed hidden in a private recovery center under a different name, one arranged through a contact I trusted with my life. I cut off all direct communication. I waited, and Daniel moved fast. Faster than I thought he would. Within days, he initiated legal proceedings to have me declared deceased. He filed paperwork to consolidate assets. He began shifting funds, executing plans I'd only glimpsed fragments of before. That hurt more than I expected. Not because of the money, but because of how easily he erased me. 12 years together, and he wasted no time stepping over my body, metaphorically and almost literally. But here's the thing about Daniel. He always underestimated me. He thought I was smart, yes, but he believed my intelligence existed within boundaries he controlled. He never realized that many of the financial systems we used, many of the accounts and structures, were built on my designs. He knew how to play the game, but I helped write some of the rules. From my quiet little room, I started making calls. Careful ones, discreet ones. I reached out to people who owed me favors. People who respected me enough to listen without asking too many questions. I accessed backups of documents Daniel thought he'd deleted. I traced money trails he assumed were invisible. Piece by piece, I rebuilt the web he was trying to spin, and I saw exactly where the weak points were. What I found made my blood run cold. Daniel hadn't just planned to kill me. He'd been preparing for years. There were contingency plans, legal strategies, shell companies already established. In his mind, my death wasn't a possibility. It was an eventuality. That realization was devastating in a way I still struggle to describe. The man I shared a bed with, the man who held my hand at funerals and celebrated my successes, had been quietly planning my removal like one might plan a hostile takeover. But grief is a luxury you can't afford when you're fighting for survival. So I compartmentalized it. I put my pain in a box and locked it away. I told myself I'd deal with it later, if later ever came. For now, I had a role to play. After 3 weeks, I let Daniel believe I was gone for good. The official declaration came through. I was legally dead, and with that, he relaxed. Not completely, but enough to make mistakes. He returned to the house. My house. Our house. He walked through the rooms, breathing air that still carried my presence, convinced he had won. That was when I made my next move. Quietly, through intermediaries, I began reclaiming control. Accounts froze. Transfers failed. Deals stalled. Daniel started running into problems he couldn't explain. I could almost see the confusion on his face, the way his perfect plan began to unravel at the edges. He blamed lawyers, bankers, regulators. He never once suspected me. After all, I was dead. The night I decided it was time to end the game, I stood in a mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back at me. I looked harder, sharper. There was a calm in my eyes that hadn't been there before, a kind of stillness born from surviving the unthinkable. I wasn't doing this out of rage anymore. I was doing it because it had to be done. I arranged for Daniel to come home early from a trip he'd taken to smooth things over with investors. I made sure he believed everything was finally back on track. I even let some funds move, just enough to restore his confidence. He needed to feel safe. He needed to feel in control. Predators are most vulnerable when they think they've already won. When he walked through the front door that evening, I was sitting at the dining table, a glass of wine in front of me, the lights low. He froze. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might actually faint. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he whispered my name like he'd seen a ghost. In a way, he had. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just looked at him and said, "You seem surprised." My voice didn't shake. That alone terrified him more than any outburst could have. He stammered, backed away, demanded to know how this was possible. I told him I'd survived. I told him I remembered everything. And then I told him to sit down, because we had a lot to discuss. What followed wasn't a dramatic shouting match. It was worse. It was quiet. I laid out everything I knew, every document, every transfer, every plan he'd made behind my back. I watched his confidence crumble as he realized I wasn't bluffing. I watched him understand that the power dynamic had shifted completely. I gave him a choice. Not out of mercy, but out of strategy. Option 1, he could cooperate fully, sign over control of the assets, and confess to what he'd done in a recorded statement that would be released if anything happened to me. In return, I wouldn't press for attempted murder charges. His reputation would be ruined quietly, not publicly. Option 2, I would go to the authorities with everything, and he would lose not just the money, but his freedom. He tried to threaten me at first, tried to remind me of his influence, his connections. I let him talk. Then I slid my phone across the table and played a short audio clip. His voice. From the boat. Apologizing, admitting enough to damn himself. The look on his face then is something I'll never forget. That was the moment he knew it was over. He chose option 1. Of course he did. Pride only goes so far when the walls close in. Within weeks, everything was finalized. Daniel disappeared from public life, quietly disgraced, financially gutted. The world thinks he lost everything due to bad investments and legal trouble. They don't know the real story. They don't know he tried to murder his wife. As for me, I reclaimed my life piece by piece. I changed my name back. I sold the house. I moved somewhere no one knew my past. I still wake up some nights gasping for air, my body remembering the cold shock of the water. Healing isn't linear, and survival leaves scars no amount of money can erase. But I'm alive, and I'm free. So when people ask me now if I believe in karma, I just smile. Because sometimes, karma doesn't come from the universe. Sometimes, it comes from the person you tried to throw away. If you were on my side through this whole mess, if you believe I did what I had to do to survive, like this video. Subscribe for more stories like this. Because there are more truths out there that deserve to be told. And share your final thoughts in the comments, because I still wonder sometimes, in quiet moments, if you would have done the same thing. I'll see you all in the next story.